rejected for her wit, a mail-order bride. Until a feared gunslinger fought to keep her alive, Clara Whitmore stepped down from the train with a single worn suitcase and a heart full of careful hope. The journey west had taken weeks, each mile carrying her farther from the narrow streets and closed doors of her old life. She was not running away, she told herself. She was moving toward something better, or at least something possible. She was 27, an age that already marked her as late by the standards of the time. Back east, that number followed her like a quiet judgment. Women her age were expected to be settled, softened by marriage and shaped by routine. Clara was none of those things. She had a quick mind, a quicker tongue, and a habit of asking questions that made people uncomfortable. It was not that she meant to be difficult. She simply could not pretend to be less than she was. After her father died, the small life she knew collapsed slowly but completely. There was no inheritance, no safety net. Teaching jobs were rare and poorly paid, and women were easily replaced. When a distant cousin mentioned mail-order marriages as a practical solution, Clara laughed at first. The idea felt cold, almost transactional. But practicality had a way of becoming urgent when rent was due and opportunities were shrinking. So she wrote letters, honest ones. She spoke of her education, her love of books, her ability to manage a household, and yes, her strong opinions. She believed honesty was her greatest strength. Several men responded, and one seemed promising enough to arrange her journey west to meet him and, if suitable, become his wife. The town she arrived in was smaller than she imagined. A few dusty streets, wooden buildings leaning slightly as if tired from holding themselves up against the wind. The air smelled of earth and smoke. People stopped to look at her, not rudely, but with open curiosity. New faces were rare here, and a woman arriving alone was rarer still. The man she was meant to meet never arrived at the station. Clara waited longer than she should have, sitting on a bench with her suitcase at her feet, watching the shadows stretch. Finally, a station worker told her the man had sent word. He had changed his mind. No explanation followed. Clara thanked the worker, lifted her suitcase, and walked away with her head held high, though her chest felt tight. She found a room at a boarding house run by a sharp-eyed woman who asked questions without waiting for answers. Clara paid for a week in advance, knowing she would need time to decide what came next. She still had letters from other men who had expressed interest but wanted to meet her in person before making any promises. Word spread quickly. It always did in small places. At first, the meetings were polite. Men sat across from her in the boarding house parlor or at a table in the general store. They asked about her cooking, her health, her willingness to work hard. Clara answered honestly, clearly, and without shrinking. When they asked what she expected from a marriage, she said she wanted respect, partnership, and a chance to build a stable life together. That was usually when their expressions changed. Some laughed, thinking she was joking. Others frowned as if she had spoken out of turn. One man told her she talked too much. Another said a wife did not need so many ideas of her own. A third, older than the rest, told her she would be happier if she learned to listen more and speak less. After each meeting, she was politely dismissed. By the end of the week, Clara understood the problem. It was not her looks, no one had complained about that. It was her mind, her wit, the way she met their eyes and spoke as an equal. The town did not know what to do with a woman like her. People began to whisper. She noticed conversations stopping when she entered a room. Women looked at her with a mix of curiosity and caution. Men watched her as if trying to decide what category she belonged in. She was not married, not promised, and not quiet. That made her unsettled ground. Still, Clara refused to bend herself into something smaller. At night, alone in her rented room, doubt crept in, but she pushed it away. She reminded herself that survival did not have to mean surrender. Money, however, did not care about pride. She took work where she could, helping in the boarding house, mending clothes, reading letters aloud for those who could not read. Some appreciated her, others tolerated her. A few openly disliked her, but she worked hard, paid her way, and caused no trouble. Trouble, unfortunately, did not require an invitation. One afternoon, as Clara walked back from the store, she heard laughter behind her. Two men she did not recognize were leaning against a post, watching her with lazy interest. Their words were not loud, but they were meant to be heard. She kept walking, her steps steady, refusing to give them the reaction they wanted. Still, her pulse quickened. When she reached the boarding house, the owner closed the door firmly behind her and said nothing, but her eyes held a warning. This was not a place where a woman could afford to be alone. That night, Clara sat by the small window in her room, looking out at the quiet street. She thought of the life she had imagined, simple, honest, shared. Instead, she found herself in a place that did not know where to put her, rejected not for weakness but for strength. What hurt most was not the rejection itself. It was the reason behind it. They did not see her as a woman trying to survive. They saw her as a challenge, and challenges made people uneasy. She considered leaving, but leave to where? Going back east meant returning to the same closed doors, the same slow fading. Staying meant risk. Neither option was safe, but only one held the chance of something new. The next morning, as she stepped outside, she felt eyes on her again. This time it was different, not curious, not judging, just watching. Across the street, near the edge of town, stood a man apart from the rest. He did not try to speak to her or smile. He leaned against a post, still as stone, his presence heavy in the air. People gave him space as they passed, careful not to brush too close. Clara did not know his name, but she felt the weight of his reputation even before she learned it. This was a man shaped by silence and distance, someone the town feared and depended on at the same time. Their eyes met for a brief moment. He looked away first. Clara did not know why that moment stayed with her, but it did. Perhaps because, for the first time since she arrived, someone had seen her without trying to measure what she could give or take. He had not judged her wit or tested her usefulness. He had simply noticed her existence. She went on with her day, unaware that this quiet observation marked the beginning of a shift she could not yet understand. For now, she was still the woman no one wanted, standing alone in a place that demanded conformity. But she was also something else, someone still standing, still thinking, still choosing not to disappear. And in a town where survival depended on strength, that refusal mattered more than anyone realized. The man Clara had seen near the edge of town did not leave her thoughts easily. She did not know why. He had not spoken to her. He had not even smiled. Yet his presence felt different from the others. He had looked at her as if she were simply a person passing through the day, not a problem to solve or a role to force upon. Over the next few days, she noticed him again and again, always at a distance, near the stables, outside the small saloon, sometimes just standing where the town thinned into open land. People moved around him carefully, giving him space without being asked. Children were pulled gently aside. Conversations softened when he was near. Clara asked no questions at first. She had learned that questions often brought answers she did not want. But the boarding house owner noticed Clara's curiosity and finally spoke one evening while clearing dishes. "That's Elia's crow," the woman said quietly, not looking up. "Best not to get mixed up with him." Clara paused. "Why?" the woman shrugged. "He's trouble, or he was, depends who you ask." That was all she offered, and Clara did not press. Still, the name stayed with her. Elia's crow. It sounded heavy, like something shaped by long roads and hard choices. Despite his reputation, Elias did nothing to bother her. He never approached her, never followed her. If anything, he seemed to make sure he was never too close. Yet whenever she felt uneasy walking alone, she noticed that he was somewhere nearby. Not obvious, just present. Clara told herself it was coincidence. Elia's crow had lived on the edge of towns most of his life. He knew how to stay unnoticed while still being seen. It was a skill learned from years of moving through places where trust was rare and survival depended on reading people quickly. He had not planned to notice Clara Whitmore. Newcomers came and went. Most did not last. But there was something about the way she carried herself that caught his attention. She walked with purpose, even when unsure. She spoke clearly, even when ignored. She did not lower her eyes when spoken to. He had seen that kind of strength before. It usually came with a cost. Elias kept his distance because distance was safer, for her and for him. The town tolerated him, but only just. They needed him when strangers passed through, when trouble lingered too close, but they did not invite him in. They did not ask him to stay. He was a shadow they accepted because it served a purpose. Clara, meanwhile, continued to build a fragile routine. She helped where she could, saved every coin, and stayed alert. Yet the feeling of being watched returned, stronger than before, not by Elias, but by others. Men she did not know lingered too long near the boarding house. Their interest was not polite, not curious. It carried an edge that made her careful with her steps and her words. One afternoon, as she returned from delivering mended clothes, she found her path blocked by a stranger. He smiled in a way that did not reach his eyes. His tone was light, but his presence was not. Clara kept her voice steady and stepped aside, refusing to be cornered. The man laughed and moved on, but the message was clear. She was alone, and people knew it. That night, she barely slept. The next morning, she decided she could not continue pretending everything was fine. She went to the town council office, a small room with a single desk and a man who looked tired before the day even began. She explained her situation calmly. She asked about safer lodging, steady work, anything that might allow her to stay without constant worry. The man listened, then sighed. He told her the town had limited resources. Families came first. Women alone were expected to marry or leave. It was not unkindly said. It was simply how things were. Clara thanked him and left, her jaw tight. Outside, the sun was bright, the street busy. Life moved on easily for everyone else. Elias saw her leave the building and noticed the way her shoulders were set. He recognized that look. It was the look of someone who had asked for help and been reminded of their place. That evening, the tension in town shifted. A group of travelers arrived, loud and careless, staying longer than expected. The air felt unsettled. Elias noticed it immediately. He always did. Trouble announced itself long before it acted. Clara felt it too. The laughter outside the saloon carried too far. The stares grew bolder. The boarding house owner locked the door earlier than usual and warned Clara not to go out alone after dark. Clara nodded, but necessity ignored warnings. When a sick woman nearby asked for help late one evening, Clara went. She wrapped herself in a shawl and stepped into the quiet street, telling herself she would be quick. Halfway there, footsteps followed. She did not panic. Panic wasted energy. She walked faster, listening, choosing her path carefully. When the footsteps closed in, she turned sharply into a side street, hoping to lose them. She did not. Before fear could fully take hold, a voice cut through the night. "That's far enough." It was calm, controlled. Unraised, the footsteps behind her stopped. Elias stepped into view, standing between Clara and the men who had followed her. He did not threaten. He did not shout. He simply stood there, solid and unmoving. The men hesitated. Words were exchanged, careless and sharp, but Elias did not respond in kind. His silence did more than anger ever could. After a tense moment, the men backed away, muttering, choosing an easier path. When they were gone, Elias turned to Clara. "Are you hurt?" he asked. She shook her head, her breath unsteady but her voice firm. "No," he nodded once. "Good." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The street felt too quiet. "Thank you," Clara said finally. "You shouldn't walk alone at night," he replied. "I know," she said. "Sometimes there isn't a choice." Elias studied her, then looked down the street. "I'll walk with you." She hesitated only a second before agreeing. They walked in silence. It was not uncomfortable. It felt cautious, respectful. When they reached her destination, he stopped. "This won't stop," he said quietly. "People notice when someone has no one watching out for them." Clara met his eyes. "I'm aware." He paused, then said, "I can keep an eye out from a distance." She understood what he was offering: protection without ownership, presence without expectation. "I would appreciate that," she said. From that night on, things changed. Elias did not move into her life, but he positioned himself around it. When Clara walked through town, he was never far. When unfamiliar faces lingered too long, he appeared without explanation. He spoke little, but his presence spoke clearly. The town noticed. Whispers followed them now, not about Clara's wit, but about the connection no one understood. Why would Elias Crow involve himself with a woman who offered him nothing? Why risk attention? The truth was simpler than rumors. Elias had seen what happened when no one stepped in. He had learned that regret lasted longer than danger. Clara, for her part, began to see beyond his silence. She noticed the way he paid fairly for supplies, how he avoided conflict when possible, how children stopped fearing him once they realized he never raised his voice. They spoke more often, always briefly. Small conversations, practical ones, yet beneath them grew something steady: trust. One evening Clara said, "They think I belong to you now." Elias frowned. "You don't belong to anyone." "I know," she said, "but appearances matter here." He considered that. "Then let them think what keeps you safe." She studied him. "And you?" "I can live with their thoughts," he said. The danger had not passed, it had only shifted. By choosing to stand near her, Elias had placed himself between Clara and the world's careless edges. He knew what that meant. He accepted it. Clara knew too. Neither of them said it aloud, but both understood this was no longer about chance. It was about choice. And once made, choices demanded consequences. As the town settled uneasily around them, Clara realized something important. For the first time since arriving, she was not invisible, not unwanted, not alone. And Elias Crow, the man everyone feared, had become the quiet line between her and a world that did not know what to do with her strength. Neither of them knew how long that line would hold. But for now, it was enough to stand on. The days after that night felt different, as if the town itself had shifted slightly on its foundation. Nothing obvious had changed. The streets were the same. The buildings stood where they always had. But Clara sensed a new awareness around her, like eyes adjusting to a different light. People noticed Elias more closely now. They noticed where he stood, how often he crossed paths with Clara, how his quiet presence followed her movements without ever crowding her. Some townsfolk felt relieved, others felt uneasy, a few felt challenged. Clara continued her routine, but she no longer pretended she was unseen. She walked with her shoulders straight, her steps measured. When she spoke, she did so clearly, without apology. Yet she was careful. She listened more. She observed who watched her, who avoided her, who whispered when they thought she could not hear. Elias said little about the change. He did not explain himself, and Clara did not ask him to. They had reached an understanding built not on promises but on actions. He walked near when needed. He stepped back when not. It was a balance both respected. Still, danger has a way of testing quiet arrangements. The travelers who had arrived earlier had not all moved on. A few lingered, drifting between the saloon and the edges of town. They watched. They waited. Their interest in Clara had not disappeared. It had only grown more careful. One afternoon, Clara noticed a difference in the air. Conversations stopped when certain men entered a room. Doors closed a little faster. Even the boarding house owner kept glancing out the window, her hands restless as she worked. That evening, Clara was asked to help read a letter for an elderly man who lived near the edge of town. He could not see well anymore, and his daughter relied on Clara's patience and clear voice. Clara hesitated. It would be late by the time she finished. "I'll be fine," she said gently when the boarding house owner warned her. "I won't be long." Elias was outside when she stepped onto the street. He did not speak at first. He simply fell into step beside her. "You don't need to," Clara said quietly. "I know you're busy." "I'm not," he replied. They walked together until the road split. Elias stopped there. "I'll wait," he said. Clara nodded and continued alone, aware of how different it felt now to have someone waiting for her return. The visit took longer than expected. The old man's hands shook as he listened to the letter, his emotions rising and falling with each sentence. Clara stayed until he was calm, until his daughter thanked her with tired eyes and a grateful smile. When Clara stepped back outside, the sky had darkened. The street was quieter than it should have been. She walked quickly, her senses alert. Halfway back, she felt it again, that sense of being followed. This time she did not turn, she did not hurry. She focused on breathing, on staying aware. A voice called out behind her, friendly in tone but empty of warmth. "Evening." She kept walking. Footsteps sped up. Before fear could tighten its grip, another voice cut through the silence. "She's not stopping." Elias stepped into view from the shadows ahead. He had not moved from his place. He had simply shifted where he stood. The footsteps behind Clara slowed, then stopped. There was a moment of tension, stretched thin and sharp. Words were exchanged, but none that needed to be remembered. What mattered was what was not said. Elias did not threaten. He did not raise his voice. He only stood his ground. After a moment, the footsteps retreated. Elias turned to Clara. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, though her heart was still racing. He nodded once. "Let's get you home." That night, Clara slept little. The reality she had tried not to name pressed in around her. This was no longer just discomfort or unwanted attention. This was risk, and risk demanded decisions. The next day, Clara sought Elias out. She found him near the stables, checking his horse with quiet care. "This can't keep happening," she said when he looked up. "No," he agreed. "I don't want to bring trouble to you," she continued. "You didn't ask for this." Elias straightened slowly. "Trouble doesn't need an invitation." She studied him. "You could walk away." "Yes," he said, "I could." "But you won't," she said. He met her gaze. "No." They stood there, understanding passing between them without explanation. Elias was not protecting her out of kindness alone. He was protecting something he believed in. A line he had once crossed too easily, now redrawn. The town council met a few days later. The travelers had caused enough unease that the leaders felt pressure to act. Clara was not invited, but she heard the outcome soon enough. The men would be encouraged to move on, quietly, without conflict. Encouraged, however, did not mean forced. That evening the air felt heavier than before. Elias noticed it immediately. He positioned himself closer to the boarding house than usual. Clara noticed too. She stayed inside, helping with chores she had already finished twice. Near nightfall, raised voices carried through the street, not loud enough to cause alarm, but sharp enough to draw attention. Elias stepped forward before anyone asked him to. Clara watched from the window, her hands clenched together. She could not hear the words, only see the shapes of men in the fading light. Elias stood firm, his posture steady. He did not advance. He did not retreat. The standoff did not last long. The travelers moved on, their pride bruised but intact. No one followed them. The town exhaled. Afterward, people looked at Clara differently, some with relief, some with respect, some with something like guilt. The boarding house owner brought Clara a cup of tea that night and sat with her longer than usual. "You've got courage," the woman said quietly. "More than most," Clara smiled faintly. "Sometimes courage is just staying." Elias did not come by that night. He stayed on the edge of town, watching until he was sure things were quiet. Only then did he allow himself to rest. The next morning, Clara found a note slipped under her door. It was brief. "All clear. Take care today." She folded it carefully and placed it in her pocket. From that point on, the danger did not disappear, but it changed. It became more distant, less bold. People understood now that Clara was not unguarded, that she was not alone, but safety brought new challenges. Rumors grew louder. Some said Clara had manipulated Elias. Others said she had softened him. Neither was true. The truth was simpler and harder to explain. Two people had recognized something familiar in each other, the cost of standing apart. Clara began to receive different looks from the men who had once rejected her. Some were curious, some were regretful, a few were resentful. She felt no satisfaction in this, only clarity. One afternoon, a man approached her openly, asking if she would reconsider his earlier offer. Clara listened politely, then declined. "I'm not the woman you wanted," she said calmly, "and I won't become her." He walked away, embarrassed but wiser. Elias watched this exchange from a distance. When Clara later mentioned it, he said nothing, but his eyes reflected approval. "You're changing things," he said eventually. "I'm just being myself," she replied. "Sometimes that's enough," he said, yet Elias knew the truth. Change invited resistance, and resistance, if ignored, found other ways to surface. Late one night, a stone shattered the quiet as it struck the boarding house wall. No one was hurt, no message was left, but the warning was clear. Elias arrived minutes later, his expression dark but controlled. He checked the area, spoke quietly to the owner, then stood outside until dawn. Clara joined him as the sky lightened. "I won't hide," she said. "I know," he replied. "Whatever happens," she continued, "I want you to know I don't regret coming here." He looked at her then, truly looked at her. "Neither do I." They stood together as the town woke around them. The danger had not defeated them, but it had not finished testing them either. Clara understood now that survival was not just about avoiding harm. It was about choosing who you stood beside when harm came close. And Elias Crow, the man shaped by distance and fear, had chosen to stand beside her. That choice would soon demand more than quiet watchfulness. Both of them felt it. The calm before the next trial had begun. The stone thrown at the boarding house changed something deep within the town. It was a small act, almost careless, but its meaning was heavy. It was a reminder that silence could turn sharp when ignored, and that some people did not like seeing old rules questioned. Clara understood this clearly. She did not feel fear the way she once had. Instead, she felt alert, steady, aware. She knew now that staying meant more than endurance. It meant facing the truth of where she stood and who stood with her. Elias felt the shift too. He had lived long enough to recognize the signs. Trouble did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it tested the ground first, watching to see who would step back. He did not step back. In the days that followed, Elias stayed closer, not openly guarding her like a shadow, but present enough to be noticed. He spoke to a few men in town, quietly and firmly. He reminded them that peace was easier to keep than to repair. Some listened. Others avoided him. Clara continued her work, but she did so with intention now. She spoke to women who had once watched her from a distance. She helped more openly, shared her skills freely, and listened when others spoke. Slowly, something unexpected happened. People began to talk to her, not about her, but with her. One woman asked her advice about teaching her children to read. Another asked how she managed her savings so carefully. A third simply asked how she found the courage to speak the way she did. Clara answered honestly. She did not pretend bravery came easily. She spoke about learning through necessity, about choosing truth over comfort. Her words were simple, but they stayed with people. Not everyone approved. A few men grew restless. They felt the change and did not like it. They had lost nothing, yet they felt threatened. The town council felt the tension and tried to quiet it with meetings and rules, but rules could not address wounded pride. One evening, Clara was asked to speak at a small gathering in the boarding house parlor. It was not planned. People simply stayed after supper, curious, restless, searching for direction. Clara hesitated. She had never intended to lead anything. She had only wanted to survive, but survival had placed her here. She stood near the window, hands folded, and spoke calmly. She talked about respect, about shared responsibility, about the strength that came from cooperation rather than control. She did not accuse. She did not demand. She simply spoke her truth. The room was quiet when she finished. Some nodded. Some looked away, but no one laughed. Elias stood near the door, listening. He had faced crowds before, but never like this. Never in a room where words carried more weight than force ever had. Later, as they walked outside together, Elias said, "You don't even realize what you're doing." Clara smiled faintly. "I'm just talking." "That's what makes it dangerous," he replied. The following week tested them both. A disagreement broke out at the edge of town, not involving Clara directly but circling close enough to touch her life. Voices were raised, tempers flared. People chose sides, quietly at first, then more openly. Elias was called upon to intervene, not because he wanted to, but because everyone else stepped back. He handled it the only way he knew how now. He spoke firmly, set boundaries, and made it clear that disorder would only harm those who caused it. No threats, no raised voice. The situation settled, but not without consequence. That night, Elias found Clara waiting for him near the stable. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I wanted to," she replied. He studied her face. "You know this won't stop." "I do. People don't like change," he said. She nodded. "But they need it." He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I used to believe keeping peace meant staying apart, staying quiet." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think it means choosing where to stand," he said. Their connection deepened, not through grand gestures but through shared understanding. They spoke more often now. About the past, about choices, about regrets that lingered quietly in the spaces between words. Elias told her about the years he spent moving from place to place, never staying long enough to belong. How being feared was easier than being known. How distance felt safer than attachment. Clara listened without judgment. She did not try to soften his story or rewrite it. She simply accepted it. She shared her own past in return. The small disappointments, the slow narrowing of choices, the exhaustion of always proving her worth. Neither offered solutions. They did not need to. As weeks passed, the town adjusted. Some resisted, some adapted. Life continued, but with new lines drawn. Then came the moment neither could avoid. A group of men approached Elias openly, their manner polite but tense. They told him the town would be calmer if he stepped back, if he left. They said it was for everyone's good. Elias listened without interrupting. When they finished, he asked one question. "And her?" They avoided his eyes. "That's not our concern," one said. Elias nodded slowly. "Then it's mine." Word spread quickly. People gathered quietly, watching what would happen next. Clara heard about the meeting before Elias found her. She went to him immediately. "They want you to leave," she said. "Yes," he replied. "And will you?" He looked at her carefully. "What do you want?" The question startled her. No one had asked her that so plainly before. "I want to stay," she said, "and I don't want to be the reason you're forced away." Elias considered this. "I've been forced away before. But this time is different," she said. "Yes," he agreed, "it is." That night Elias stood before the town council. He did not argue, he did not defend his past. He spoke only of the present. He said he would stay as long as his presence brought stability, and if it did not, he would leave on his own terms, not because fear demanded it. The council listened, some reluctantly, some with relief. Clara stood at the back of the room, unseen but steady. She realized then that whatever happened next, neither of them would walk away unchanged. In the days that followed, the town settled into a fragile calm. Elias remained. Clara stayed active, visible, engaged. People began to understand something important. Elias was not the cause of unrest. He was the barrier holding it back. And Clara was not the problem they feared. She was the voice they had ignored. Slowly, trust grew. Not everywhere, not with everyone, but enough. One afternoon, as Clara helped a child read near the window, She felt a sense of peace she had not known before. Not safety born of ignorance, but safety earned through clarity. Elias watched from across the room. He saw not a woman in danger, but a woman rooted firmly where she stood. Later, he said to her, "You've changed this place." She shook her head. "No, we did." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the street. The town looked the same as it always had, but it was not. Clara no longer felt like a visitor waiting to be dismissed. Elias no longer felt like a weapon kept at a distance. They had both chosen something harder than escape. They had chosen to stay. And though neither knew what the future would demand, they knew this much. Whatever came next, it would not find them unprepared, unguarded, or alone. The final test was close now. They could feel it in the quiet. The quiet that followed felt heavier than any noise that had come before. It was the kind of quiet that made people listen to their own thoughts. The town moved slowly, carefully, as if everyone knew something important was about to be decided, even if no one could say exactly what. Clara felt it each morning when she stepped outside. People greeted her now. Not all of them, but enough to notice the difference. Some smiled, some nodded, some simply met her eyes and did not look away. That alone told her how far things had come. Elias felt the change in another way. He was no longer avoided as often. Men spoke to him directly instead of around him. Children no longer hid when he passed. He did not mistake this for acceptance, but he recognized it as respect earned through restraint. The final test did not arrive suddenly. It unfolded over days, quietly, through choices. A serious illness spread through the nearby settlements, reaching the edges of town. Fear returned, not sharp and angry this time, but uncertain and tiring. People worried about supplies, about care, about what would happen if too many fell sick at once. The town council hesitated. No one wanted to take responsibility. It was easier to wait and hope. Clara did not wait. She organized help without asking permission. She spoke to families, arranged care for the weakest, shared what she knew about cleanliness and rest. She worked alongside others, never above them. Her calm steadiness spread faster than fear. Elias supported her quietly. He helped move supplies, ensured order without force, kept watch where needed. He spoke when his voice could prevent panic and stayed silent when silence worked better. Together, they held the town steady. People noticed. When the worst passed, and it did pass, the town found itself changed again. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but undeniably. At a small gathering one evening, someone raised a simple question. What should be done now? The answer came from several voices at once. Not from authority, but from experience. Clara should stay. Elias should stay. The word surprised some, relieved others. When Clara heard, she felt a warmth she had not expected. She had not stayed to be accepted. She had stayed because leaving no longer felt right. Acceptance was something else entirely. Later that night, she and Elias walked together beyond the edge of town, where the land opened wide and quiet. "You could leave now," she said softly, "on your own terms." He stopped walking and looked at the horizon. "No. That's the difference." Clara found lasting work teaching children and helping families manage their homes and letters. Her wit no longer marked her as difficult, but as capable. Elias took on work openly now, no longer on the margins. He helped build, repair, protect when necessary. His past did not disappear, but it no longer defined him alone. People learned something important from watching them. Strength did not have to be loud. Protection did not have to control. Independence did not mean isolation. One afternoon, Clara received a letter from the East. An offer, a position, stability. She read it carefully, then folded it and set it aside. That evening she showed it to Elias. "You could go," he said. "I could," she agreed. "Do you want to?" Time moved on as it always does. Seasons changed. The town grew slowly and unevenly. Clara and Elias remained part of it, not as a story people whispered about, but as people who belonged. They were not perfect. They disagreed. They challenged each other. But they chose respect over fear, honesty over comfort. Clara had arrived as a woman no one wanted because she would not make herself smaller. She stayed as a woman who proved that strength and kindness could exist together. Elias had been known as someone to fear. He became known as someone who stood firm when it mattered most. And though their lives were shaped by hardship and choice, one truth remained clear to those who watched them. Sometimes, survival is not about being saved. Sometimes it is about being seen. And sometimes, the person who stands beside you does not claim you, change you, or silence you. They simply help make sure you live long enough to choose your own future.